we're almost coming towards the ending stages of this section. Today we're going to be looking at emotions. Emotions is a very vital part, especially when we're looking at sport and especially team sports, right? Working with teams. So this section is called channeling emotions, right? And I think that's a really powerful image, right? This was post a major event, and just the relief and all the effort which is come true can be really seen in that picture. So I really wanted to put out this picture because I think it's so powerful if you just stay with it. And right next to the athlete who's bending is another one who's applauding, so you can like really see this variety of emotions here, right? So I want you to also take a minute and go, how are you as a person? Where would you categorize yourself? Would you say you're emotional? How emotional are you? And how do you handle emotions? Because that's what we're really going to be looking at. I'll also be touching a little upon my own PhD, which was about emotional management in cricket in this section. Yeah. So we all use the word I'm emotional, this is an emotion, that was a good emotion, that was not a good emotion. So let's really look at it, right? What really is an emotion, right? So Desi defines it as an emotion is a reaction to a stimulus event, either actual or imagined, right? Just want you to take a second. So it's not necessarily us reacting to something which is physically present, but it could also be imagined, and a lot of the times that's what happens, right? It's like if you think of an athlete who's let's say a young budding athlete is going in for a very important match, right, which could decide his or her selection for a upcoming tournament. What is this athlete playing in the head, and what has this athlete been playing in the head even few days prior? It doesn't necessarily have to be immediately, right? I have this young cricketer I'm working with, and so he starts his work. We started like before the season started, but he was kind of going with, oh, when the season starts, okay? And it's the minute he says that, and the minute he's sensing that, okay, this part is going to be tough, and am I going to get selected for this tournament, and what's going to happen, you suddenly already notice that his body language is tightening, he's probably going back, his probably jaws are tightening, and that becomes very important. Of course, kudos to him, he came earlier, right? So we could really begin the work than if he had just come, let's say, a week before the tournament. So that time what you're going to do is very basic management, right? So it's very, very essential to understand what is this player, right? So we all know that when we talk about a human being, there are thoughts associated, there are emotions, and there is behavior. Sri Aurobindo, whose philosophy is also based the Indian psychology, he categorizes into, I'm just giving a comparison, okay, into the physical, which is our body, the mental, which is our mind and thoughts, and then the vital, which is emotions. And he actually says how, it can either make or break you, right? So it's very, very essential. We think I thought this and then I got emotional, right? But it's also very essential to go, okay, what actually first reacts in me? Do I notice something in my body? Do I notice some feeling or emotion, or do I notice a thought? So then you'll begin to understand, oh, which is the place I'm actually predominantly functioning from, right? Because especially with sports, a lot of people think psychology is just to do with the mind, but I always say your body is giving you cues. When an athlete is saying my heart is racing, right, that's a cue as to probably what emotion you're feeling. You may not be able to label it, but it will be wonderful if you can label it, right? Because then you start understanding, okay, this is what is happening, right? So when I should I move? Okay, this is a little lower. Maybe you can see it better if I move. Yeah. So if you look at the diagram, right? So what we discussed in the previous slide was thoughts, emotions, behavior, right? Now, when I started my career as well, and there's still a lot of dialogue which goes on with people as to, thoughts come first and then come emotions. But the longer I've been in, in sport and psychology for that matter, and the more I've understood and integrated a lot of modalities, you realize that it's not necessary. Someone could just be very emotional as a person, and it could be the emotion which is coming first. So, when we work only with a thought, we probably lost track that it's probably the vital or the emotional which is playing here. So this is why it's extremely important to go, okay, what's happening and what can I do, right? So it's not always over here, that's what I'm trying to say. So but what's very essential is our thoughts of course influence emotions, our emotions also influence thoughts, right? And these two together lead to expression, and what we see is the behavior, right? So I'll come to this slide, but I want to just talk about this slide first. Okay, so now let's take an example, right? Let's take an example that you're getting ready. I'm going to first take a non-sports example and then we'll build into it, right? So let's say you're getting ready. It's morning. It's an important day and you're ready, and something happens and someone drops something on you. Let's say water or food. Now what happens? Now, right? And this is where we're going to play with this thought, emotion, behavior, and the consequence module. So, first thing, let's say you're rushed, okay? Could be you might get really angry on that person or that being, if it could also be a pet, and probably respond out of anger, right? Second could be you go into, oh my God, what just happened? But you just get up and go, okay, what do I need to do? Let me just clear this up. But you still ignored that person or that being over there. Third could be, right? You take a minute, you've paused, okay? And then you've gone, let me clear this. And once you've probably calmed a little, you can go back and talk to that person, right? And say, okay, and move on. Now what's going to happen? The first was storming, was anger, right? Would be just really angry and walk out or probably explode. How's that other person or the other being going to feel, right? That person's also going to be in that state. Second is you walk out, right? You were at least left the place uncertain. Okay, but the other person is still not going to be feeling great about it. Third is you could still choose to walk out. You probably even got in a little angry and said something, but then you calm down, or after you've cleared yourself, you come back and say, okay, it happened, I have to go. Now just think about the three. And this is not about preaching, right? This is just for us to reflect on what happens, right? Now, as you listen to each of this has happened to each one of us, including me, right? Like every one of us go through these scenarios, correct? It's not a first timer. But as you listen and you put yourself, I want you to also put yourself in the other person's place. What would happen to you and what would be your feeling in each of the consequences? One is being shouted at. Second is, being ignored. Third is then a reconciliation. Right? So now why is this important for us, right? Because first is when something happens, we all lose it, okay? We're all human beings, like I've said before. I always tell athletes, especially when they get into that state, that listen, we're all in the process of becoming Buddha, right? We're not in that state yet. So, we have our moods, we have our personality, we have our certain traits, right? So point is to reflect and not to start beating ourselves. That doesn't mean that I justify everything I do, but what it means is, okay, certain times demand certain things, and you've probably been in a certain state and behaved in a certain way. Now, that is why if you look at this image in front of you, I call it the 3-step process, which is also what we follow pretty much with performance enhancement. At least I follow that. Is first is to get self-aware. What really happened here? What really triggered me? Right? And when do I get triggered? Right? So, because this becomes very vital, it's one is with our family. Second is also, let's say you feel that at a very important meeting. Now, when we go into that state of total, being absorbed by an emotion, right, which is not affecting us positively, that's going to affect your performance as well, right? And that is why once I start getting aware, once I start reflecting, that's why reflection, right, neuroscience also says it begins to shift our mirror neurons. It begins to shift how the way we look at things, how the way we're going to be as human beings, and how we're going to function and connect, right? So the next is, so then once I know what's happening is, I can go, okay, you know what, this state when I'm getting so angry, there's certain things I can try out, right? That is where we begin to monitor and also try out. Then comes the final where the regulation begins to happen, and that is vital, right? Like it's always, there's a problem focused approach and there's a solution focused approach. So some of them will go, I did this, and go on and on and on about it. That's not going to serve the purpose, because yes, there was a problem, how do we solve it? That becomes very important, right? So now I'm going to just touch a little, which I think most of you all will know, on emotional intelligence, which will then help us to connect to emotional management, or what was emotional labor, which was my PhD thesis. Okay, of course, we have with us in front of the screen Mr. Dhoni, who was known as the Captain Cool, right? And what better image, right? Because he was someone who was really, what would you say, like so acutely sensitive to what was happening in the team, and he also knew what and how to do, what to bring the team to work them for a desired result, right? So what Mr. Daniel Goleman actually says is that, there's one is the awareness part again, which is the self and social, which is who am I, how do I function, right? So knowing about myself, and then how do I interact with another, right? What impacts me? So that becomes your awareness, right? Once I'm aware, then becomes the management. Okay, so how do I regulate myself again, right? Within myself, right, for my own, let's say, work, and then in social situations. So he takes these 4, so they basically 4 quadrants here: self-awareness and social awareness, self-management and social skills, right? And now I want to connect this to my thesis, which and the reason I bring this in here is also because my thesis was on emotional management in cricket. In fact, I actually took a concept called emotional labor from the management sector, which is you use emotions for your work or your role, of course, and we modified it. So it looks at 4 main quadrants, which is really reading the emotions of others, managing the emotions of others, suppressing emotions of myself, and expressing or oneself, and expressing unfelt emotions. So it really is about how much does a person employ this, and what was the need? Was it the need of the individual? Was it the need of the organization? Was it the need of the game? Right? And I took both cricketers and organizational personnel, so including support staff, including CEOs. So just to really understand what happens in the setting. And my participants were Australian and Indian cricketers, right? And I'm going to touch on some of the key aspects just in terms of understanding emotions. And this is a beautiful, very touching quote, which was by one of India's top players after the World Cup exit in 2007. If you'll remember, we got knocked out quite in the early stages, and this is what he says. I'm going to read it out, okay? And I want you to listen as an individual before you listen as a fan. Just as a human being, right? I've given my heart and soul to Indian cricket for 17 years. No coach has ever mentioned, even in passing, that my attitude was not correct. Cricket has been my life. I am shattered beyond words and I feel helpless. I've never felt so bad in my entire career. World Cup was our passion, our collective dream. Tell me, even as the world goes on talking about our defeat at the World Cup, has anyone spared a thought to ask what we are going through? Right? Um, I remember it really touched me very deeply. I felt, and I think as a psychologist, your empathy quotient is quite high. You probably worked with a few of these players, or at least you worked with individuals, and it really hits you. And if we actually sit with this, yes, of course, when we identify ourselves with the team, with our country, it hurts when they don't perform. We feel let down. But I think what he's put across here is so clear and succinct, because do we realize how difficult and what difficult emotions they're sitting with, right? And I want to and also to connect it to um, sometimes what we see, right, and what we expect may disappoint us, but we need to also understand what's happening to that individual or team. And I'll give you an example. This was again, I think, when I was in Australia, during my PhD phase. And I remember one of a very good friend of mine, he said, oh, XYZ players, there's so they got so much attitude, they didn't give a autograph. And I said, no, they're really nice, most of the time they did. And then I said, when did you ask? And something just made me ask. And India had actually lost the match very badly just prior. And I think this was in Perth. And the team's walking out and people are asking. And then that's when, they've really not. So you need to understand, just put yourself in a position when you're feeling really bad. You've had a, let's say, presentation, it hasn't gone so well. You don't really want to face anyone. You're also sitting with very difficult emotions, right? um and of course, I may be excited as a fan, or I may be excited, that, oh, this is, my country people, and we go running and ask, but then the person's in a very different emotional space, right? And I think here, this is where emotional intelligence comes in, emotional management comes in. Can I be a little conscious of, it's not just me here, it's the other as well? Because yes, as much as it hurts, they are the ones who are getting all the thrashing, especially, let's say, for media, the whole world over, like, right, especially when you lose a difficult match. And I that's the reason I really wanted to bring in this, one of this, I wanted to start with this. um and then this was a very interesting finding from my study as well, which was on handling mixed emotions. So mixed emotions is in a team game, when you've performed really well, but your team has not, and your team loses, right? And the other way around, like your team wins, and you probably like had a really bad day. So I'm going to just read a couple of these, and all names are changed over here to maintain confidentiality. um and you'll get an understanding of what this is. Okay, so handling mixed emotions. I was happy that I got a big score, but disappointed that the team lost. It was a weird situation. I'm disappointed but also relieved that I did well, right? The next one, I got a 10 wicket haul in the match and we lost by few runs. That really hurts, right? It's a bit of both, you're happy but not. It's a little disappointing, hard, and I'm angry but more batsmanly. Right? Like, you can really feel, really get into this, right? Really feel what is happening. Imagine getting a 10 wicket haul and then your team ends up losing. You're feeling good with how you've performed, but then your team still lost. It's such a, you're handling both ends of the spectrum. And then it, at times the team wins, you're happy, but then you got a duck, you got a zero, right? And no runs, but you have to be happy because the team won. So it's very important to really understand the many emotions that an athlete faces, right? And I can be bringing in this, and I'm sure each one of us have also felt this at certain times, right? Like maybe the company did really well, or maybe as a if you're a student, your class is done really well, but then you're not happy with a particular score, right? And or your group has got something big, but then you feel you didn't really live up to the expectations, so it is going to bite you, right? So to be mindful of these emotions as well, and especially when it comes to sport, because it's so fast, right? And then I wanted to bring a very vital aspect. We've been discussing every each of the faculty of some really great topics, and I think this is one of the topics, and which is really switching your roles from being a professional. Priyanka and me touched a little on this when we spoke about retirement, but this is even with performance, because one of the things which came out in my study was how difficult it is to be on the road. You're constantly on the road. You're on, and it is, you really need that support system. Your emotions also take quite a beating, right? So this was an example of one of the Indian cricketers who actually gave this. So he says, shifting from, let's say you've come from a long tour and you come back home, right? Like shifting between the two roles, it's a different life altogether when you're playing at the highest level. You have a lot of pressure, expectation, so you're a different person. When you come home from tours, you're a different person altogether. You cannot just shift to it very quickly. It takes a couple of days to adapt to your family life again. It won't happen immediately. You have to be smart to adapt to these kind of things very quickly. You cannot show your emotions and anger at your parents or your partner because they don't know the inside story. It is unfair to them, right? And I have to mention one of these coaches, one of these players, in fact, sorry, who said that there was a time when something was happening at home, and he said, I just could not emote. I was, because you're so used to maintaining a certain image, right? Like balancing and holding your emotions, that I just could not when I had to. And I think that's a very important aspect to recognize, mainly because it is still emotional management. So somewhere the player has become a little numb in the personal life. So you know you have your cricketer or you have your athlete, and then you have to learn to switch off and then come into the next or your personal role. So one of the things that I tell athletes is, you know switch on, switch off. When you're in your training mode, your player mode, you're just focused, and once you finish, switch off and just come back and be like any other normal human being. It's very, very essential. The role of the coach becomes very important. I've touched on this, so I'll go very briefly with this, because they hold the emotional mirror, especially with the highs and lows of elite sport and cricket in particular, because then this helps build resilience, helps them focus and be team oriented, and this is also one of the reasons why athletes have to learn to be emotionally aware and manage and regulate themselves. This is where discipline and professionalism comes in, and then the adaptability and fighting spirit. So it is essentially, and a coach plays a very huge role in this whole aspect. I want to finally bring this section together by asking, how emotional do you think you are? And what do you think is the role of emotions in work and performance in your life, right? Because what I've really tried to bring here is, of course, we all know, good emotions and, helpful emotions and not so helpful. But what I've really tried to bring in here is help you to recognize, what is you? How emotional are you? Right? When we were discussing flow and different aspects, we've seen that each athlete and player is different. A Nadal is very different from a Federer, right? To recognize that, and then in the next section, we're also going to see, because then this also impacts stress and performance, right? So I hope this section really helped in bringing this together. We will also be having a coach speak on managing emotions and channeling emotions, right? Because once we can do that, then it gets channeled into performance and sport. right? So the aim is not just to go, okay, this is happening, I'm emotional, I'm angry, I'm this, but going, okay, what can help me, like what Mr. Hannon was saying, right, in the eyes of model, and how do I channel this energy? For example, I'll give this example of this very young cricketer who was saying, I perform really well when I'm angry, right? So, so we had to think of scenarios where you go, okay, you bring up that anger, which can then be channeled into performance. But you shouldn't get so angry that you explode, and then your emotional center has overtaken you and you've lost contact with the others. So then performance will take a beating again, right? So I hope this was helpful and you got some new insights from this section on channeling emotions. We will watch a video on how to harness emotions by Rayar Dharma, who's a Reiki grandmaster and energy healer.
Today's topic is harnessing energy to enhance performance. So, when we talk of energy, then we are talking of vibrations and frequencies, right? Which each of our cells are made up of. Everything on the planet we know is energy, including our physical body, right up to the subatomic level. We are nothing else but energy, like radio sets walking around, receiving signals and giving out signals. So it's not difficult to appreciate thereby that higher our energy levels, higher our frequency, would determine how high the quality of our life is, our mood, our happiness quotient, our performance, productivity levels. Now, to be able to channel this potent, great potential, to harness our highest potential from the storehouse, which is our subconscious mind. The method of channeling the pristine, powerful energy emanating as emotions from the subconscious mind, the fire, the power. For example, if it is anger, how do you channelize the energy which is getting emanated from this emotion called anger? We do know that anger can destroy. We need to also know that if you flip the coin, the same highly charged emotion which we are labeling as anger could be channelized, circulated, single focused energy into becoming a challenge, a drive, a mindset, what is needed to be in high performance levels. Greater quality of life, being more resilient. So once we've tapped into this power, into this storehouse of power, we can also, with the same energy, enhance the power of intentionality or goal set. And then the energy that we will use will also be from the same source, which we can then call determination, steadfastness, the energy to follow through, commitment, integrity. A simple tool, a simple technique. I call it the bow and arrow effect. The deeper inward we pull the bow with the arrow, soak into the harnessed energy, pristine, powerful energy stemming from the subconscious mind. Once this bow and arrow is soaked in all of this, the throw of the arrow will be much wider, more impactful, more accurate, and the best and the greatest of your potential is what you will experience. Think about it. I will leave you with this thought.
I'm Priyanka and this is Santosh. We've already met Santosh. Um, it's again wonderful to have you here, Santosh.
Thank you.
So today we're going to be discussing about how young athletes can actually manage their emotions and how coaches play an important role in channeling the emotions that athletes actually go through, young athletes specifically. and how we can actually help them to succeed in their roles. So my very first question, to you is: you have a 6-year-old son and you have a
Correct.
10-year-old daughter who are into shooting. So what do you keep in mind when you're working with, young athletes like them?
I look at working with discipline. So it's about discipline and coming back every day and training. And if that has to happen, that means they also need to enjoy the game.
Yeah,
Otherwise,
yeah.
they're not going to come back.
True,
Right?
with
Young
children.
minds.
Yeah.
And today, the amount of opportunities the kids have. If they don't want to do shooting, they have swimming. If they don't want to do swimming, they have gymnastics. If
Yeah.
they don't have gymnastics, they have, let's say, cricket. The
Yeah.
other is they have Bharatanatyam or they have X,
Yeah.
Y, Z. The options just doesn't end. It's like, endless Excel sheet. That many options are there. Back in the day, we didn't have that kind of options. So today, the number of options are open to kids is huge. So parents are also getting confused in terms of where to put their children.
Yeah.
So if the kid want 2 days, it doesn't turn up something, the
that
parent
he-
decides,
Yeah.
no, this the kid doesn't like, so let's go to some other sport.
Yeah.
So that's not the way to deal with it. The best way to deal with it is allowing the kid to explore and make them come back. Right? If they are really good at it, there are exceptional talents which are prodigies. So if you find such prodigies, lucky for you. And what you have to do is you just have to sustain them in the game and ensure that on the long term they're learning their technicals a little better. Why do they become prodigies? Is because they understand something about the game that nobody else has understood.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely.
They've defined their game to themselves. In the mind, the kid has already told this is how it is. So this is, if I do this, this is the outcome of it.
Yeah.
And that is so very well defined that you don't want to break that. Now the kid knows that portion of the game.
Yeah.
So now the coach's responsibility is to create the other aspects of development around using that knowledge. So don't break that knowledge. Use, slowly inculcate good habits and build other good habits around that understanding.
Yeah. I think you brought in few interesting insights, Santosh. One is you've spoken about creating a safe environment for the child to learn and explore at his own pace.
Correct.
Right? Because that will help the child develop competencies.
Correct.
Right, within. And the other thing which I really liked, is also the fact that you said about the learning pace within the child. I love the child to learn at his or her own pace. And you also spoke about the fact that not everybody has the same level of talent
Correct.
or success.
100%.
So some of them may be exceptionally talented, some of them may take their time. So
it becomes very important for us in terms of seeing whether there is real talent or there is talent which is going to take time. So if it's going to take time, we cannot compare this student, say, look at this person is doing really well, why don't you also perform? So it's not going to happen like that.
yeah.
So every person is going to take time, and at the same time, beyond, let's say, time is the only factor. I always keep telling. Somebody might reach it in 6 months, somebody might reach same thing to reach about 3 years, but eventually both are competing at the same level.
True.
So you need not bother about that at all. So be it as a coach or as a parent, patience is the key.
Yeah.
And more importantly, to deal with the students in terms of ensure that they don't drop out. See, and kids are these days are much more emotional than what we would have seen back in the day.
Yeah.
We don't expect this kind of emotions or emotional problems that kids to have what we would have expected out of us when we were kids.
Yeah.
Is not the same anymore. These kids are more susceptible to different
Absolutely. And
feelings.
you're also speaking like the reality that we're facing, right?
Absolutely.
Their exposure is so much, the pressures are so much right now for the
Exactly.
children, and their emotions are very, very different. And also, like, some children might perform exceptionally well and some of them may not. So how do you help as a coach to emotionally channel these emotions?
The first thing is to learn. As a coach, what are the things that are happening. I'll give a very good example in terms of, one of my student came up who was just 12-year-old and said, I have a cluster headache.
Oh, okay. What
I
is
was
that?
wondering what is cluster headache.
Yeah, what is cluster headache? I'm also wondering what is cluster
I had
headache.
to open Google and say what is cluster headache.
Okay.
So So these kids learn so many things, different
Yeah.
things, right? They're
Okay.
able to pinpoint and say certain things. So first thing is to adapt in terms of their language and the way things they deal with.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the first step. And then look at what is justified and what is unjustified, right? With these kids these days, they have 100 reasons to not do things. So at some times, you say no, you put your foot down and say this you need to complete. It's a matter of discipline. The other aspect, yes, you can let go
Yeah.
a few things. Sometimes there are a lot of very young athletes who come in and they're very good at sport, but they're very naughty,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
They're
True,
like
true, true.
they're all over the place.
Yeah.
So you allow them to be themselves,
Mm.
right? You allow them. At the same time, you throw in some challenges, saying that okay, today you complete this very difficult task, then I let you off. If you finish it in 5 minutes, I'm very happy.
Okay. Okay.
But
Yeah.
throw in a difficult task which might not happen in 5 minutes.
Okay. Got it. Got it. Okay.
So if they
Yeah.
finish in 5 minutes, well and good. If they can't finish in 5 minutes, then absolutely no problem.
Okay. Yeah.
So
That's very, very
you know,
interesting.
You just have to learn and adapt over a period of time how to deal with, especially with children and young athletes. And there are some very young people who are really good at their game. So at that point of time, it's very difficult to coach them
Yeah.
because they don't want to let go that understanding of their game. So that means now it becomes the coach's responsibility in terms of to keep observing how they are growing, whether that is enough for the present level of competition. If it is yes, good, well and good, allow them to continue to perform really well, ensure things are not affecting them. And at the same time, if you're expecting that athlete to perform much better at a higher level, then ensure that in a slow dosage you're giving the right amount of techniques which will help them build over a period of time.
Right.
And the real fear these days with kids is losing whatever they already have.
Yeah.
They're
Correct.
scared of letting go anything to acquire new things.
Oh, okay.
So this is another big challenge that working with young athletes, they will be like, no, I don't want this new technique, I don't want this new settings, I don't want these changes.
Okay.
This is going to affect my game, this is going to pull my game down.
Okay.
And their ability to bounce back is also a little not as strong. So from a setback, let's say a couple of competitions they lose, they're like really down with their
Right. Right. Absolutely.
attitude. So you need to work on that. So it is a big challenge to work with younger athletes. So I think the right way to deal with it would be having a structured coaching levels where you have coaches working under the senior coach, you have junior coaches or the
Right.
assistant coaches who deal with certain things, certain aspects of technical part of it. So the emotional part of it can be handled by the coach, and rest of it should be handled by the psychologist.
Right, right. True, true. And as a coach, you might have also seen that sometimes athletes, some of them may be very aggressive, right? Some of them are very anxious.
Correct.
So, how do you help them? Like, how do you identify and what do you do?
So aggression can always be channelized,
Mm-hmm.
right? If a person is aggressive, you can always try to channelize that into the right energies.
Yeah.
So it does help. An anxious person is a little more difficult to deal with than an aggressive person, right? So an anxious person, you don't know when it's going to affect them more and when it's going to affect them less.
Okay.
So it becomes quite a challenge. So sitting and discussing with them, and any person who's anxious, giving them tasks much ahead of
Okay.
simulating things, right? Working with them much ahead of the actual problem does help in terms of easing their burden.
Okay.
So let's say a person has to go and present in front of a camera or in front of a crowd, right? So give him a dosage of work. Every day you do this, every day you do this, every day you do this. So slowly that he builds that immunity towards that day.
Yeah.
And that day that anxious person will get affected, but it might not be as bad as what
Right.
it
And
would
you're
have
saying that
otherwise.
helping them prepare for the task way ahead.
Correct.
And also giving them that confidence, to do this particular
Correct.
thing. That can be quite helpful.
The other
right?
side, the person who is very aggressive, you can always charge them up. Tell them, again, it depends on the kind of the game they are playing. And I'd be really happy if somebody is very aggressive when it comes to cricket or basketball. The way they run, the speed increases, the way they charge at things and they get it done. So it does help. But if it's a very dormant sport like, chess or shooting, so now how do you channelize that energy? It's pure energy. How do you control that into making it a smoother thought process?
Yeah.
Again, that will take a long time.
Yeah.
So depending on sport and
It's a lot of thinking.
it's a lot of work.
and there is no proper one sort
No,
solution to it,
no, you'll
right?
never get
Yeah.
a one stop solution for all these problems. So it is something a coach learns over a period of time.
Yeah.
So it's not going to be easy for coaches as well. So coaches also have to have a long term picture in terms of where my coaching career is going.
Mm-hmm.
So what am I learning? What are the things that I've learned this year? So sitting and making an assessment at the end of the year, like a balance sheet,
Mm.
that these are my assets, these are my liabilities. So as a coach, these are my weaknesses, these are my
Yeah.
strengths. So next year I'm going to work on a few more strengths
Mm.
and try and reduce a little bit of my liabilities. So that's help.
Okay. All right. So with this, we come to an end on the discussion with respect to how you can help athletes manage their emotions and help them become more successful. Thank you.
Thank you.